They were television's favorite neighbors, the lovable, bickering couple who always made audiences laugh. But behind the scenes of I Love Lucy, Fred and Ethel were anything but friendly. The actors who played them, William Frawley and Vivian Vance, reportedly hated each other, and the tension was so intense it almost tore the show apart. Before they became Fred and Ethel Mertz, Frawley and Vance lived very different lives, shaped by hard knocks, ambition, and personal struggles that would fuel one of television's most infamous off-screen feuds. Frawley was already a seasoned Hollywood actor when I Love Lucy came along. Born in 1887, he had spent decades in vaudeville, Broadway, and film, often typecast as the grumpy, blue-collar, everyman. His humor was sharp, his delivery rough around the edges, and his personal demons. Particularly his battles with alcohol were an open secret. When Desi Arnaz offered him the role of Fred Mertz, Frawley was nearly 65 and past his peak as a movie actor. He saw I Love Lucy as a final chance at stability and grabbed it with both hands. Vance, contrast, was younger, refined, and fresh off years of stage success. Trained in classical theater, she was admired for her versatility and comedic timing. At the time of casting, she was in her early 40s, making her 22 years younger than Frawley. When she learned he would play her husband, she reportedly recoiled, scoffing that no one would believe she was married to someone so much older. It was a careless comment, but one Frawley never forgot. Though old school, his pride was sharp, and Vivian's jab cut deep. Their tension began before a single scene was filmed. Frawley was outraged that his television wife had mocked his age and appearance, and he carried that resentment like a badge. From day one, he treated her with suspicion and disdain, seeing her as pretentious and disrespectful. Vance, in turn, saw Frawley as a washed-up drunk clinging to his last paycheck. Their dynamic was cemented long before the cameras rolled. The network had hoped for natural chemistry, but what they got was raw hostility wrapped in professionalism. Somehow, that friction translated on screen as lovable bickering. Audiences adored Fred and Ethel's sarcastic exchanges and playful jabs, never realizing the venom underneath. Frawley and Vance may have loathed each other, but they understood their roles and delivered every single time the red light turned on. Behind the applause and laughter, though, that first clash between egos became the foundation of a feud that only worsened with time. While the public laughed at Fred and Ethel's arguments, the real battles were happening after the director yelled, "Cut." Things deteriorated further once Frawley's personal struggles began affecting production. His reputation for being difficult did not start with I Love Lucy. Long before the sitcom, he was known in the industry as a heavy drinker with a short temper. His battles with alcohol had cost him roles, and Desi Arnaz was well aware of the risks when casting him. Arnaz had only one rule. If Frawley ever showed up drunk on set, he would be fired. Surprisingly, Frawley honored that agreement, but even sober, he could be a handful. Vance came from live theater, where professionalism and punctuality were non-negotiable. She prided herself on preparation and discipline, and found Frawley's rough-edged behavior grating. While he saw her as uptight and superior, she viewed him as lazy and coarse. The divide between their work ethics widened the rift. It showed in nearly every interaction. From then on, their on-set relationship became a quiet war of eye rolls, sarcastic barbs, and icy glares. Frawley would mutter insults under his breath, and Vance would laugh just a little too hard at his mistakes. The tension was thick enough that the crew noticed, making rehearsals uncomfortable for everyone involved. Yet somehow, the final product on screen remained flawless. Like two professionals locking into character and masking their contempt with convincing chemistry, Desi Arnaz, the show's producer and co-star, found himself in a difficult position. He respected Frawley and admired his old Hollywood timing, but he also knew Vance was critical to the show's success. Rather than try to mend their relationship, he kept them in a delicate balance, avoiding unnecessary rehearsals between them, never seating them together at events, and keeping their scenes efficient and focused. Arnaz understood they would never be friends. His goal was simple: keep the piece long enough to get the shot. Vance, despite her frustration, never lashed out publicly. She confined her complaints to private conversations with her inner circle, though the cracks were always visible. A makeup artist recalled Vance finishing a scene with Frawley, storming off set and whispering, "I deserve an Emmy just for putting up with him." "Ah, Frawley," in turn, would loudly refer to her with an insult between takes. Unconcerned about who might overhear, still, neither actor walked away. As much as they despised each other, the show's success and the paycheck were too important to risk. The charade continued episode after episode, season after season. While the bitterness grew, the real challenge came when they had to act like they genuinely liked each other. On screen, Fred and Ethel Mertz were a comedy dream team, sarcastic, playful, and oddly affectionate. Off camera, Frawley and Vance could barely tolerate each other. That warm chemistry fans adored was an illusion, held together by professionalism and an unspoken agreement. Get through the scene, then get as far away from each other as possible. Filming became a tightly controlled operation, with directors limiting rehearsal time and shooting quickly to avoid confrontation. Scenes between the two were executed fast, with no room for improvisation, because neither wanted to spend an extra second in the other's presence. Crew members felt the tension constantly. Even after nailing a scene, they would walk off in opposite directions without a word, leaving the set silent. A visiting director once joked that Fred and Ethel got along better than the actors portraying them. And no one laughed. The hostility seeped into every aspect of production. Vance avoided sitting near Frawley during table reads. He insulted her voice and delivery within earshot. When asked to act sweet toward him in a scene, she reportedly said, "Do we really expect people to buy this?" Frawley overheard and fired back, "They've bought worse from you." Despite the strain, viewers never noticed the feud. Their timing, delivery, and banter made Fred and Ethel a highlight of the show. Fans believed the connection was real, which frustrated Vance, who felt she was carrying the scenes while Frawley received credit for the chemistry. Frawley, meanwhile, believed she was trying to outshine him, deepening the resentment. Occasionally, the tension boiled over. Blocking sessions sometimes turned into shouting matches, with accusations of upstaging and laziness flying back and forth. Desi Arnaz had to step in personally to remind them that their jobs depended on putting the show first. Somehow, they always did. Their ability to perform under pressure was remarkable, but the professionalism came at a cost. Pretending to care for someone they loathed took a toll, with tensions simmering constantly, even if the audience never saw it. Those managing the fallout, including Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz, bore the brunt behind the scenes. Keeping Fred and Ethel together meant constant damage control. And Ball and Arnaz were not just the stars, they were the engine driving the entire show as producers and co-creators. Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz carried the pressure of keeping the show running smoothly, which included managing the constant behind-the-scenes tension between William Frawley and Vivian Vance. It was a delicate balancing act that tested even their control over the most successful show on television. Desi Arnaz saw Frawley as a reliable professional despite his reputation for drinking. Frawley showed up on time, knew his lines, and hit every mark. Arnaz admired that and, even with pressure from CBS executives, defended him with one strict rule. If Frawley ever came to work drunk, he was out. He never did. Lucille Ball, meanwhile, was much closer to Vance. The two bonded early and shared a genuine friendship. Ball respected Vance's theater background and depended on her comedic instincts to bring emotional depth to the show, while she remained outwardly neutral during cast disputes. Her sympathies leaned toward Vance, though she publicly supported Frawley. Knowing the show's success depended on everyone playing their part, managing the feud meant making constant adjustments. Scenes between Fred and Ethel were carefully written to avoid unnecessary closeness. Directors limited rehearsals between the two, knowing prolonged contact only invited drama. Even affectionate moments were filmed quickly, with minimal interaction beyond what was needed on camera. Behind closed doors, Lucille and Desi acted as silent referees. Studio executives were aware of the friction, but the couple worked hard to prevent the press from catching on. There were no interviews addressing the feud, and no backstage gossip allowed to slip through. I Love Lucy was too valuable to let personal conflicts taint its image. Despite everything, Desi never considered replacing either actor. Once joking that the day Fred and Ethel actually got along would be the end of the show, the joke hit close to home. Their real-life dislike mirrored their on-screen dynamic: grumpy, sarcastic, and occasionally affectionate. One telling story came from a celebratory dinner for the show's milestone episode. Frawley and Vance arrived separately, avoided speaking, and reportedly rolled their eyes when a toast was made in their honor. It was a small but clear sign that the feud was permanent, no matter how well they performed together. Lucille and Desi held things together for as long as they could, but even they could not prevent the fallout when CBS offered a spin-off starring Fred and Ethel. By the mid-1950s, I Love Lucy had become a cultural phenomenon. Its ratings were unmatched, its stars beloved, and the Mertzes had carved out their own fan base. CBS thought a spin-off focused on their marriage and misadventures would be a surefire hit. Frawley jumped at the opportunity, eager for more money, more spotlight, and a chance to prove he was more than just a supporting player. Vance, however, flatly refused. She did not even consider the offer, finding the thought of more scenes with Frawley unbearable, whether fearing typecasting or simply not wanting to spend more time with him. Her answer was a hard no. Frawley was furious, convinced Vance was sabotaging their futures out of spite. He accused her of selfishness, unprofessionalism, and arrogance. Their already icy relationship turned venomous, and polite civility disappeared. Vance stopped hiding her disdain, and Frawley doubled down on insults, sometimes calling her names directly. The spin-off was dead before it left the ground. CBS backed off, and Lucy and Desi, reportedly relieved, chose not to push it. For Vance and Frawley, the offer marked a turning point. There would be no reconciliation, no middle ground, and no future collaboration. The irony was cruel. Audiences thought Fred and Ethel were inseparable, but in reality, one actor was willing to walk away from fame and fortune just to avoid the other. The bitterness had gone beyond dislike. It became career-defining to the public. None of this was visible. Fred and Ethel Mertz remained comedy gold, relatable, dependable, and effortlessly funny. Their chemistry seemed natural, leading viewers to assume Frawley and Vance had camaraderie off-screen, when in truth it was a carefully maintained facade. In the 1950s, Hollywood image was everything, and studios had entire departments devoted to keeping scandals out of the press. Any signs of tension were buried under cheerful press releases, lighthearted interviews, and perfectly posed cast photos. Vance and Frawley played along in public, smiling at events and answering questions diplomatically. But once the cameras stopped flashing, they avoided each other entirely. Vance, disciplined by her theater background, confided only to close friends, never risking public complaint, while Frawley, more outspoken and private, also understood the unspoken rule: never let the public know. On set, however, he made his feelings known, mocking her voice, her looks, and her acting. Crew members recalled hearing him mutter insults while she rehearsed. The studio quietly adjusted to keep the peace, planning promo tours so they rarely traveled together, seating them far apart at award shows, and placing Lucy and Desi strategically in group interviews. Any whispers of conflict were quickly dismissed as jokes. Despite all the friction, the show never suffered. Week after week, viewers watched Fred and Ethel laugh, argue, and support each other as if nothing were wrong. Their performances remained seamless. The tension between William Frawley and Vivian Vance remained invisible to the audience, but that invisibility is what makes their story so fascinating. Everything people loved about Fred and Ethel was built on two actors faking it with every ounce of energy they had. It wasn't affection that kept their scenes sharp. It was professionalism and a shared commitment to the show's success. And they pulled it off so well that even decades later, many fans still cannot believe the truth. But the illusion lasted only as long as the cameras rolled. Off-screen, the divide between them never healed. Once I Love Lucy ended, Frawley and Vance finally got the distance they had longed for, but time did not heal anything. If anything, their resentment hardened with age, spilling into interviews and leaving no doubt that their hatred had survived long past the final curtain. Frawley was the first to speak publicly, and rarely kindly. He never missed a chance to insult Vance, calling her ungrateful and impossible to work with. Joking that if she died, he would send flowers to celebrate, he meant it. His bitterness was personal, not performative. In his eyes, Vance had not just insulted him. She had ruined what could have been the biggest opportunity of his later career. Vance, slightly more diplomatic, still made no secret of her contempt. In interviews, she refused to speak his name, referring only to that man or my so-called husband, once describing working with him as the hardest part of her career. When Frawley died in 1966, she reportedly celebrated with champagne, a story consistent with how those around her remembered her feelings. There was no reconciliation, no late-in-life phone call, no private truce. Their feud remained preserved, like the very episodes they once filmed together. Even Lucille Ball, close to both individually, could never get them in the same room after the show ended. The animosity had roots too deep to pull. What is striking is how differently they were remembered. Frawley died before the era of reboots, retrospectives, and sitcom nostalgia, while Vance lived long enough to see I Love Lucy cemented as a cultural icon. In her later interviews, she often fondly recalled Lucy, but never Fred, ensuring that history remembered who she believed was the problem. In the end, the performances lived on, while the people behind them drifted apart permanently. Their final years confirmed what insiders always knew. The laughs were scripted, but the hate was real. Even today, long after both are gone, fans are still learning the truth behind the laughter. Decades later, I Love Lucy remains a classic, watched, quoted, and adored by new generations. Fred and Ethel Mertz continue to make audiences laugh, their sarcastic banter and offbeat affection frozen in time. But knowing the truth behind the scenes changes everything. What once looked like playful teasing now feels like veiled hostility, the sideways glances, the flat tones, even the pauses between lines. Suddenly, it doesn't feel like acting anymore. That is what makes their story compelling. The performances were brilliant, but they were fueled by something very real: mutual resentment buried just below the surface. Vance and Frawley proved that even the most toxic working relationship can produce magic when the cameras roll, but it came at a cost. Neither softened, neither tried to repair what was broken. They gave the world unforgettable television while privately nursing a grudge that never died. Today, fans rewatch I Love Lucy and still laugh at Fred and Ethel, but now many also wonder what it must have been like to deliver those lines while despising the person standing just inches away. It adds a darker, more complex layer. This was more than a feud. It was a battle hidden in plain sight, performed for an audience who never knew what they were really watching. Behind every laugh was a lie.